Wow. That's a little frustrating. I think we all know that's frustrating, though. It's getting old. Don't know why that keeps happening. I really got to fix that, or people are just going to give up on me here. Anyway, very frustrating. It's actually getting very slow here. I don't know why. Anybody back yet? We'll see if anybody's back. And for those who tune back in after this, me just sitting here doing nothing really isn't helpful. So I'll chat. Hey, Kyle. I don't know. I don't know. It's. I think it's got to be this laptop. It's got to be the problem. So it's very frustrating. Had quite a few people listening. Hopefully we'll get folks back. Put that in the background. Folks are coming back now. My apologies, folks. Really frustrating. We were talking about Liberia. Matthew, welcome. Cape Town, excellent. When people write CPT, I think of captain, the abbreviation for for the rank. I might have to go out and buy a new laptop at this rate. This is insane. Don't really want to do that. But can I even go buy a laptop? The computer stores are all closed, and I'm not buying one online without having seen it. All right, let's put Giselle on pause and save that for the next time. Hey, Sonia, welcome back. Hey, guys, thanks for coming back. Really, my profuse apologies. It's very frustrating when that happens. But I was talking, Kyle, you'd asked the question, so I'll continue on with the story about Liberia. And if people come back and jump in, that's great. But yeah, let me get back to this. So Liberia had a 13-year civil war, and I had said that a Marine rifle platoon could have ended this in a matter of days. And I was serious about that because what we saw in Sierra Leone, a war that went on for a long time, for a number of years, in which the RUF fought and terrorized people, cutting off limbs, famously because there had been a presidential campaign in which people held their hand up and said, just go vote. So they started chopping off limbs. It was horrible, horrible, horrible. Anyway, so all it took was a infantry battalion minus from the UK that finally went in there and ended the civil war in Sierra Leone in less than 3 weeks. It took disciplined troops who reacted professionally, and they could defeat yahoos running around the road, naked, half naked, high on daga or cannabis, drinking and firing weapons wildly in the air, killing civilians and not killing each other. And what I said is, from what I'd seen in Liberia, is you could have sent Marines in there and it would have been the same situation. The conflict would have ended quickly. But no, it drug on for 13 years. And finally, all of the factions collapsed into Monrovia, coming from the bush towards Monrovia. And then eventually Charles Taylor had no choice but to capitulate, and he fled. And the deal was worked out with the Nigerians and the Americans that he could go to Nigeria if he would just give up power. And that got rid of a tyrant, and that ended the conflict. And then Liberia began its reconstruction in 2003. I went there in 2007, and it was still going on. Still going, not the conflict, but the reconstruction. It was really just getting started in 2007, really about that time, 2006, 2007. And so I was charged with rebuilding the Armed Forces of Liberia. When I accepted the assignment to go to Liberia, we really lost a lot of people there. Gosh, I hope people can come back. Jeez, sorry. Yeah, so when I got the assignment, I was just supposed to go and handle security cooperation. That means, exercises, military training, selling of things like that, and helping librarians with military advice. But as it turns out, the rebuilding of the Armed Forces Liberia had gone very slowly. And what happened was that I got there, and an army that was supposed to be completed, a new 2,000 soldier army, was only 102 soldiers, 105 soldiers. Okay, 105 soldiers. So the program had started, but they ran out of money. The U.S. ran out of money for the program, and it kind of was fizzled out, and people were angry. So I got there, and through the hard work of others and myself, we managed to get funding. Mostly those in the State Department did the hard work to get the money, managed to get funding, and then I manipulated the funding in a way that it would work so we could accomplish the training and still build the facilities and acquire the equipment. But there wasn't enough money to do all that, so I had to balance those requirements. And so when I left there about 15 months later, the new Armed Forces Liberia had 2,134 37 troops. We owe them 2,000, so they had more than they were required. All of them having been recruited, vetted for criminal and war crimes backgrounds through basic training, through individual training as infantrymen. So everyone was qualified as infantrymen, including the females. And then advanced individual training. Most of them had completed that, whether they're going to be military police, medics, or truck drivers, or infantrymen. Most had completed that training. And then we also had produced 127 second lieutenants. The requirement for the force structure was we produce 66 or 67 as lieutenants, but we ran through 127 as lieutenants. So we had also trained over 800 soldiers to be qualified as non-commissioned officers, and the requirement for non-commissioned officers is about 500. Now, they didn't have 500 because they didn't have the money to pay them as sergeants, so they didn't promote them, but we had trained them all. And that doesn't mean the mission was done, but when I left, 2,137 soldiers, we had activated the first battalion of the 2 battalion in the structure, and we'd activated 13 individual companies. And so the force was on its way to becoming what it is today, the Armed Forces of Liberia. At that time, it was under the operational control of the American Embassy and under my control, which was an odd situation, but that's what happened. And so arguably the Armed Forces of Liberia since then has been a force for good, but I'm not exactly an unbiased observer. I'm deeply embedded in this process, and I have something to, not to lose or to gain from it, but the point is that I'm not exactly unbiased about, I've tried to be objective as possible about the AFL. One of the jokes that I tell is that when I was there, my predecessor, Commander Dan Honkin, a Navy officer, had been the one that was there when they ordered a bunch of the ammunition. And the ammunition was shipped from Eastern Europe as a donation, very complicated process because there was a UN arms embargo in Liberia. We had to go through all this through the UN and through ECOWAS and then get overflight permission from all these countries. Anyway, so they donated the ammunition and the arms, and so we used AK-47s because they came from Eastern Europe, and they're easily replaced in Africa, and they're very functional. And then the ammunition for there. But all the boxes of ammunition, the mortar rounds and things like that, all of them were stenciled American Embassy, attention, Commander Dan Honkin. So what I used to joke with people all the time is that they asked me, I said, so what are your thoughts on the Armed Forces Liberia? What do you think? I said, and how will you judge this in the future? They said. And I said, listen, all I can tell you is what I know now. The people who've recruited into this army meet the standards. They're professional. Most of them are very dedicated patriots. A lot of them, especially in the first 2 cohorts, have given up jobs that pay significantly more. Like even being a truck driver in Liberia paid $500 a month, and they were making $100 a month after coming in the military. I said these people are committed to Liberia's future and its safety and its security because they don't want to live through what they've seen growing up. So I said, all I can talk about is what's going. Hey, welcome back, HBM. All I can do is say I can tell you about these guys and what they do in the future. I can't account for that, but what I can say is that if 10 years from now there's a war crimes trial against the Armed Forces of Liberia, I'm not worried. And the journalists and people that I talk to would look at me puzzled. Why isn't he worried? And I say, I'm not worried because when they look for the evidence, who's responsible for the war crimes here, they won't find my name. They'll find Commander Dan Honkin on every box of ammunition. So, just joking, but you have to have a sense of humor when you deal with these things. So anyway, the Armed Forces of Liberia. Since my departure, they've done a number of things. They played an important role in the Ebola crisis in 2014. They did play a significant role in helping cordon areas of town off and of the country and deliver supplies. And they were very important. They've also done peacekeeping in Mali. They unfortunately lost soldiers there as a consequence of action in Mali. And they were supposed to be contributing to the Darfur peace mission. I don't know if that's followed through or not. But they've also done civic works in the country. And my predecessor started a program in which they sent the medics to the main hospital in Monrovia, the JFK hospital, which hospital is a very generous term, maybe when they built it in the 60s. But when I was there, in the Ott decade, it was barely a hospital, just a structure with a few doctors and hardly any resources. Very depressing building. But the medics would go there and they would provide their services free of charge, which was great. It was fantastic from a lot of standpoints. Now, my predecessor set it up, but I took the program and ran with it, and I took it to a different dimension. We had never really made any effort to publicize the fact that the medics were providing free medical care to Liberians at the hospital. But I brought the press out repeatedly, about 4 or 5 times in my time there, to the hospital, and we walked around and they interviewed the soldiers, they interviewed the medical staff there, and they interviewed patients and talked to them about the Armed Forces of Liberia soldiers wearing their army fatigues with their Liberian flag on the shoulder, who were present for the hospital rounds. And what we did is we had three squads of soldiers, and one squad would do the rotation at the hospital this week, and then they would do a rotation at the clinic on the military base the next week, which, by the way, now is named 14 Military Hospital. They named this little building that we built a military hospital, which is a bit of a stretch. I saw a photograph of it recently because one of the deputy ministers was COVID-19, and he was placed there and then just discharged. So they showed a photo, and I'm looking like, we built this 15 years ago. Anyway, well, we didn't. PAE built it, but we paid for it. Anyway, so one squad at the hospital, one squad at the clinic for a week, and then the other squad would do training with the infantry across the highway in the local training area. So when you're training, someone gets injured, you need medics, so they're out there. So you also get the field training for them. So we'd rotate this way, so all the medics would get exposure to the hospital. Now, the benefit for us for the program is that in the military, you don't come across many pregnancies. You don't deal with obstetrics much. You, fortunately, thank goodness, in peacetime, don't deal with a lot of trauma cases or accident victims, things like that. And you don't deal with the elderly most of the time. And that certainly was the case for the military there. So much of what they were seeing in the clinic was a twisted ankle or a case of malaria or a gastrointestinal problem. And so the medics weren't getting a lot of experience dealing with unusual medical situations, things that if they went on peacekeeping or in combat, they would come across. So by sending them to the hospital, they got exposed to all of these things and learned about all these medical conditions and played a positive role. For the country, this was part of its military giving back to civil society, which is a critically important aspect of reforming the military in Liberia, because the old Armed Force Liberia had often been accused of preying on the public. Not all, but parts of it. So this was important to increase confidence in the new military and also show they were a force for good in society. They got training out of it. And then from the standpoint that we wanted transparency, because we don't want any country to think that anything unusual or hidden was going on here, I used the media as an outlet to inform the public and the international community, but the West African community, about the things that the Armed Forces Liberia were doing. And a lot of people are simply amazed. There's stories that came out of that experience which still resonate with me today. So I was walking downtown in Monrovia in civilian clothes, and I was stopped by a couple people one day and like, Colonel Wyatt, Colonel Wyatt. People knew who I was. I'm not claiming I was a celebrity, but people knew who I was, people I'd never met before, because I was on the radio, I was on television, and I was at endless ceremonies. And plus people talk a lot in Liberia. People love the gospel and share things. So people knew I couldn't go anywhere and not be known. There aren't a lot of tall white guys walking around the city anyway. So, but Colonel White, and these people came up, approached me in the street, and they thanked me. I said, for what? No, for what? For what's going on at the hospital, JFK. I said, well, what do you mean? And they told this story about, and this is why soldiers can play a positive role beyond all the things I've just said. So we had this soldier who was on rotation with a doctor there. Now, this story got all over Liberia, so I doubted it, but then I actually talked to the medics, and it turns out it was true. But you know how people embellish stories, but this is what happened. I'll tell it to the best of my recollection. So at the hospital, typically there's more patients than you can see in a day, and they line up sitting outside in the hallway, on seats, on benches, or on the floor. And so the doctor comes out and sees one patient at a time. Well, he had a young soldier with him, a specialist or a private who's with him, who was on rotation with the doctor, and he was coming out getting patients. So the doctor came out, and the soldier was with him to get the next patient. And there had been an elderly gentleman who'd been sitting there for about an hour and a half waiting his turn. He was almost next in line. A young lady had come into the clinic, and she sat down, and she was a little further down the row, and the doctor saw her. She was attractive, apparently, very attractive, but she was ill. So the doctor sauntered on over to the young lady and asked her how she was feeling. And he was about to bring her into surgery to treat her, when the medic leaned forward to the doctor without trying to embarrass him publicly and said, sir, excuse me, this gentleman's been waiting a long time. He's quite ill. I think you should probably see him first. The doctor, not wanting to be embarrassed, I would imagine, made the right decision and said, oh, okay. So they walked back. They took the gentleman, the old guy, in. He got treated. People told this story all over Monrovia. It spread faster than a wildfire. I guess that's why we say things spread like wildfire. It was astounding how many people repeated the story and told it. And what it did is it showed that soldiers who are disciplined and who are trained to do the right thing can make a difference. And this was better than any press we ever could have paid for or bought or begged for. Is just the word of mouth that came about because this soldier doing this in a clinic. And those sort of stories happened all the time. One thing is, you don't see women driving trucks in Africa. You don't see a lot of them driving trucks here in the States, but you see some. But in Africa, you see it very seldom. It's not a common situation. Well, because the education requirements for a truck driver are much lower than they are, say, for a military intelligence specialist or for a medic, those who qualified to be a truck driver and only a truck driver, not something higher for education level, were frequently women, of the women we had in the military. So we ran our first motor vehicle operators course for the heavy truck drivers, and 2/3 of the class were female. Almost 75% were actually female. And the press was astounded by this. Now, what happened with this is that I would take the female soldiers and go on the radio, which was broadcast all over Liberia. It was the United Nations radio. We had a program called Coffee Break, I think it was called, something like that, a morning program, drive time show. And I would go on there and I'd take the females on there and they would talk about their experiences about being soldiers in the military, what it's like. It was any different than being a male soldier, the challenges they face, they're unique as women, and then the opportunities that are presented to them. And so this was quite popular and it really helped the image of the military. But the other thing that really helped was so one day while they were training in the truck driving course, the females stopped at a place called at this big junction out near a place called Red Light. It's just the librarians can be very uncreative at times. They call this place Red Light because there's a traffic light there. It's the only one around for a few miles, and so that part of town is called Red Light, not because of prostitution, but because of a traffic signal, a robot for the South Africans. There's a robot there. So what happened is the trucks were stopped, and the soldiers sitting up there with their caps on and their fatigues on, and they're waiting because there's a lot of traffic. They can't get through. The red light didn't work, by the way. It was broken, but when I was there. But they're sitting there, and then somebody looks up and realizes there's a woman driving the truck. And they're like, hey, there's a woman driving the truck. And next thing you know, the crowd starts forming around the trucks in the convoy and going up, and they see all these, and they climb up on the truck, and they're shaking the hands of the soldiers. It was astounding, absolutely astounding. These people were amazed that women could drive trucks. Really had a positive impact for the reintroduction of the new armed forces library into civil society. Their actions since then, whether it's been peacekeeping or their performance publicly, have been mostly impressive. There have been some slip-ups here and there, but you can expect that with a new military and also one coming out of an environment like that. But I would say, given the situation that the new armed forces library came out of, they've done an amazing job since then. The current Minister of Defense, National Defense, is the former lieutenant who I trained as a second lieutenant and became the commander of the forces, becoming a 2-star ultimately. I keep telling people I joined the wrong military. In the time that he went from private to 2-star general, I went from major to full colonel. And now he's Minister of Defense. So I joined the wrong military. Again, back to my desire to be the benign dictator of a small African country. I will also appoint myself, as a 4-star general when I become a dictator of a small African country. I'm just saying. Anyway. Yeah, so Kyle says it's really good to hear about those kinds of stories. It's sad that our whole news agency would rather thrive on bad news rather than the good news. Well, yeah, I'm with you on that. It's funny, Kyle, because a lot of stuff I post on LinkedIn and even a little bit of the content here, people, well, especially on LinkedIn, though, people think that I just talk about negative things. No, I did a podcast last week in which I talked about a 9-year-old girl in Liberia who's recorded a song to fight COVID-19. It's getting massive play on the radio stations there. And also I talked about a song that Bobby Wine recorded about a month ago in Uganda, positive things that the people in civil society are doing to help combat COVID-19 and improve the situation. I like to talk about positive things, but it's difficult to find positive things. That's why it's so wonderful for me, for having spent so much time in Africa, that I can actually talk about my experiences, things I've actually seen or been part of that were positive, because people don't focus on those. So I'm happy to talk about positive stories. Africa's an amazing place. South Africa is a truly amazing place with lots of opportunity, lots of potential, and lots of truly wonderful human beings. But it's also a continent with a lot of problems, a lot of corrupt people, a lot of selfish people, a lot of racists of all stripes, and it's unfortunate. But that doesn't mean it's a bad place. Anyway. But yeah, so I like to talk about the positive stories. So yeah, I have a lot of them here. I can give you another one real quick. We're running up on the top of the hour, and I'm going to drop off just before the top of the hour. Not yet. Don't run off. Please don't go. Not until just before the top of the hour, because I'm going to check on Ronaldo's stream just to make sure he doesn't have any comments for me or things he wants to talk about for tonight's broadcast, in which we're going to cover EWC in South Africa. But let me tell you another quick story about Liberia that's a positive story. So we would frequently do these what we call humanitarian assistance projects, in which we use Department of Defense money, our Department of Defense money, to rebuild a school or a clinic or less likely, less frequently fix a road or a well. We're not supposed to be doing that, but sometimes you have the resource, you can do it. But usually rehabilitate a building or facility so that a community organization can use it as long as the building belongs to the government. So we did a lot of schools and clinics, and one of the clinics we did in the Freeport, which is a part of Monrovia. So one of the things we did. Ranger Buddy says AFL soldiers do not lie, cheat, or steal. Right time, right place, right uniform. Yeah, good phrase. Yeah, maybe remind me sometime to tell you about the Czech story. I introduced Czech. It's not my thing. It's an artillery thing, and I'm not even an artilleryman. But I introduced it into Liberia because I used it all the time around the soldiers in the back brief and brief back mode to make sure they understood. Because Liberian English is not American English. It's not even the same. I used to speak Liberian English fluently. It's something you pick up. But anyway, but back to this story. So in the free port of Monrovia, we had rehabilitated a local clinic, and what happened is that we did this during something called the Africa Partnership Station, which was a military exercise that took place with U.S. ships that came offshore all over West Africa. We put ship riders on from other African countries so that they participated, and they were actually members of the crew. They weren't just just ceremonial. So they made decisions. Like the deputy commander on the ship was a Nigerian for a little while, and then a Ghanaian, and they actually were in charge of things on U.S. ships. So the ship riders, and then one of the other things we did is they brought postal equipment that was donated from the U.S. to restart the post office, the postal service in Liberia, but they also brought the Seabees. Seabees are the construction battalions in the Navy, the ones who are responsible for landing in Iwo Jima, fixing the airfield, building facilities, stuff like that. So they're capable of construction projects. So the Seabees came, and we had them in Liberia for over 3 months, nearly 4 months. They did all kinds of projects. Well, one of the challenges I had was that the soldiers who were going to be combat engineers, we didn't have money to buy the equipment to train them. So all we could do is give them the principles. That's not very useful education. So we delayed the program to train them in their their training to be a specialist in construction and combat engineering until we knew the Seabees were arriving. So that when the first class graduated, the Seabees were already on the ground, not when they arrived in confusion and trying to figure out what they're doing, but after they're on the ground already doing projects. They're already on to their second project. When the class graduated, we had a ceremony, and then those combat engineers, 25 of them, I think it was, went out and they did on-the-job training with our Seabees for the rest of their time there, for 2.5 months, almost 3 months for those guys. And then second class got 2 months with them. And we went out to this clinic, and we had a ribbon cutting ceremony. The ambassador came out, our ambassador, one of the ministers came out from health, and all these people. And the press was out there, and I always spoke to the press, answer any questions they had. So they're talking to me, and they're asking me about the event, and they're thanking the Americans for having helped rehabilitate this clinic in this part of the free port. It's important to people. And they said, well, it's really great to have all these Americans here helping. I said, well, Americans, what are you talking about? And the guy pointed at the soldiers, and I said, those aren't Americans. And he looked at me like, huh? I said, look at their uniform. You see this? I looked, well, mine, it's on the right shoulder. That's an American flag, yes? And he said, yeah. I said, well, look at the uniforms. They're wearing Liberian flags. They are. I said, go talk to them, interview them. You can talk to anyone you want. And so they interviewed the Liberian soldiers, and this was unbelievably positive because the people in the community knew that the Liberian soldiers were there along with the American Navy combat or the Seabees, and they saw the Liberians every day. When the press came and the story was going out, they didn't realize that this was being done by Liberian soldiers who were contributing back to civil society at no cost to civil society. And what do we get out of it? Great positive press, great community relations, and we also get out of it actual on-the-job experience for these combat engineers that we couldn't pay for and buy anywhere else, and they get experience. It was a win, 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 win across the board. And that was my approach to rebuilding the Armed Forces Library. Everything we did, we tried to do that, involve the civil society as much as possible. Oftentimes I found that civil society would yap, oh, we're not part of the process. We want to be part of the process. So I make them part of the process, and then they don't show up or they don't be part of it. So I don't have a lot of empathy when I hear people in civil society say, well, the military is doing things and we're not involved. I found that that's often because you don't try to be involved. But anyway, that's a little bit about what happened in Liberia. Another positive story from my experience there. And listen, I'm proud of the Armed Forces Library today. They're underfunded, they're under-resourced, and they're expected to do things that they don't have the capacity to do. But despite that, they do the best job they can. And by and large, they've avoided corruption and dishonesty. And I think it all goes back to the basis of when we started. The first cohort, which the current commander, Prince Johnson, came from, and his predecessor, Daniel Ziakon, who's now the Minister of Defense, came from. They, in that first cohort, spent a good 2 months plus learning civics and civil control of the military and respect for human rights. Now we continued that later, but it wasn't nearly as intensive because we didn't have the same resources. But that first cohort, that was a key part of what they did, and they've brought that ethos through, and it sticks to this day. So I'm very proud of the Armed Forces of Liberia, and I hope that they continue on the path that they're on. I'm not so proud of the government of Liberia. I got some real issues with the government, even the previous government, but especially the current government and the way they're behaving. Let's see, quick comments before I run out of time here. Mentioned last week you'd be touching EWC. Was this around the show? Martin, that'll be tonight, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time. So that'll be the evening stream on Ronaldo. I will be talking about EWC with Ronaldo tonight. Um, uh, One of the problems was that the new AFL officers had problems making ethical decisions because they wanted to see everything as right or wrong, black, white. No gray. You're absolutely right about that. My Ranger buddy there says, yeah, that is a problem. But that's a cultural thing, and we had to reshape that culture with the officer candidates. That everything isn't black or white. There is a gray, and there's times that leaders have to make decisions in the gray zone. You have to, and you have to make the best decision that you can. So when you weigh punishing somebody, it's not simply because. So let me tell a quick story. A couple minutes here left, but so when I first got to country, Prince Johnson, who's now the commander of the Armed Forces Library, not the previous Prince Johnson who cut the testicles off of Samuel Doe, a different Prince Johnson. But this Prince Johnson is an honorable person. He was a second lieutenant. He married a Swedish NGO worker who'd been in Liberia, and she'd gone back to Sweden. They had a kid or a couple kids. But he hadn't married her yet. He intended to marry her. I don't know if they had the kids already, but anyway, he had this relationship. He wanted to marry her. He joined the military, and he'd gone through the training, and then he put in a request to take leave to go to Sweden to get married. Well, the government ignored this. The Ministry of Defense, they didn't process his leave request. I got there, and I was told that he disappeared and went to Sweden, and he was AWOL. He came back, and my initial response, without any other information, is that, well, we get kick him out of the Army. We can't have people like that being leaders in this military that just disappear and go AWOL. That's unacceptable. Well, we had something called the Joint Personnel Board, comprised of 3 members. The dean of the law school, Counselor Jala, is a lawyer. The Minister of Defense, Brownie Semikai, and myself as the head of the Security Sector Reform Program for National Defense from the American Embassy. We were the Joint Personnel Board, and that board decided who entered the military, and we took disciplinary action based on evidence presented before us in each individual case because there was no uniform code of military justice at that point. So we were the military justice. And so his case was brought before us, and we listened to it. And it turns out that I found out that he had put in over a dozen requests to take leave. He followed all the rules, and they ignored him. So initially I was going to say kick him out, but then after Councilor Jala and I talked about it, and we talked about the importance, and I'd seen that he was a person with great leadership potential, that we should not simply kick him out. So I voted against kicking him out, and Councilor Jala voted against kicking him out. Minister Semikai was not happy. Long story short, Prince Johnson was among the finest officers that the new Armed Forces Library had, and today he's the commander. But if I had voted differently, he would have been kicked out of the Armed Forces Library in 2007 and not be part of it today. So there's a positive story, and also shows you how leaders have to make decisions in a gray area. And that decision, I believe, was the right decision, both for the Armed Forces Library and for Prince Johnson, but also for Liberia, more generally speaking. So there you go, folks. Let's see what else we got here. But it's not better areas. Okay. Liberian flags made USA from Clarksville, Kentucky. Okay, folks, it is 10 o'clock. Thanks for tuning in. Actually gaining viewers right now, so I apologize, but I'm going to drop off. Or is Ronaldo on before I drop off? Let's make sure Ronaldo's on. Somebody let me know. If Ronaldo's not on, then I'll stick around here for a little bit longer. But Ronaldo host is supposed to go on at 10 o'clock today. But anyway, so that's the Liberia situation for those who are curious about it. It was one of the most interesting times of my life. It was also one of the most tiring and challenging times. I worked 7 days a week, usually 12 hours at minimum, often 16 hours a day. It was fantastic. It was amazing. Some people who are envious or jealous would accuse me of having an outsized ego or thinking I ran the world, and that was not the case, folks. Trust me. I had all the opportunity in the world to run around Liberia like I was a king in command and control things, and I could have let my ego get out of control. But this is obviously a biased view, but I would argue that much of what I did was humble. The problem is that I was in a difficult situation, which people wanted things. I'll stay on, Sonia, and a little bit longer. If your auto comes on, somebody just let me know, because I know some of you got both streams up and going. But when I was in Liberia, people wanted things all the time, and everybody had the answer, or they thought they had the answer. but all the people thought they had the answer weren't responsible. At the end of the day, success or failure fell on my shoulders and Ambassador Booth's shoulders, and I had to make the right decisions for myself, for the government of Liberia, for the U.S. government, a lot of different stakeholders there, and try to address all of them. But ultimately, I felt that my responsibility, of course, was to my nation, but was ultimately also to the people of Liberia. And so everything I did was focused on the people of Liberia. And for those who were there and remember it, if you're honest about it, I think you'll find that my actions supported that. It was about the people of Liberia. So I tried to engage with the people of Liberia. I tried to make them aware of their military. I tried to make sure we gave them the best military we possibly could. But we had limited resources. And I think that the people who worked on that program, both for DynCorp and PAE, overwhelmingly, not all, there were a few bad apples and they were sent home, but overwhelmingly, those folks did an amazing job, and I really appreciate them, and I appreciate the efforts they put forward, whether it's the people who work for Jeff Rodriguez in DynCorp, or it's the folks working in PAE, really some amazing stuff. And also the soldiers of the Armed Forces of Liberia. The vast majority of them put forward an amazing effort and really, really made a difference in that country. And we see it since then. We see in their actions the things they've done. I feel bad for them, though, as I said, because they don't have the resources they need to train properly, to recruit as regularly as they need to, and also to do all the training they need to do. But that's a common refrain for militaries around the world. But despite those handicaps, the AFL is doing the best that it can, and it's doing quite well, actually. It's not the super army that a lot of people thought it would be. I think people are dropping off now. I'm down to 15's dropped off here. So let me see. Kyle says, good seeing, checking your stream. Have to run. Okay, he's taking off. Ronaldo's on. Okay, Sonia. All right, I'm going to take off, folks. Thanks for tuning in to my live stream. I'll see you on Ronaldo. Those going to Ronaldo. Those who just follow my stream, thanks for tuning in this Sunday. I appreciate you being here. We will. I'll be on tonight on Ronaldo Host program on YouTube. For those who don't know that program, you can look it up. He's a YouTuber in Nelson Mandela Bay, South Africa. We'll be talking about expropriation without compensation in South Africa and the racialization of politics in South Africa, mostly focusing on the expropriation of property. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you all later. Have a pleasant and wonderful Sunday, and I hope everyone's well. Catch you next time. God bless.